Thanks, Kristen. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Robin Krallman. I want to welcome you this morning and thank you for joining me. I'm just going to give you a brief background on me. I've worked in some capacity for workforce development programs for over 20 years now. And I started out as a career planner many years ago in LWIA 23. And then I moved to a trade coordinator for about 10 years. And after that, I did some independent contract work with several LWIAs. And for the last 2 years, I've been a state monitor. So since I've worked on both sides of the fence, I see the challenges from both perspectives now. So let's face it, monitoring can be stressful. And I remember every year my supervisor would share the list of sample files chosen by the state. And I remember just always hoping that not too many of my files were chosen. Not because I was doing anything wrong, but just the idea of someone from the state looking closer at my work caused a certain level of fear or anxiety. A healthy anxiety about monitoring is normal, and we've all felt that. But having a real fear of monitoring, we don't want that for any of you. So over the years, I developed some tools that career planners could use to successfully maintain their files and in turn reduce their fear and lessen the anxiety when monitoring came around. And that's what we're going to be doing here today. I'm going to give you some insight from our perspective as monitors and also give you some guidance to help increase your understanding of what's required of you as a career planner. And when we monitor, we go through a series of questions when looking at your files. So the choice of answers are yes, no, and NA, and that's it. So the goal is to look at your files and be able to answer the monitoring questions yes. So keeping that in mind, let's move forward together. And I think it's much more difficult to achieve positive outcomes if you as the career planner don't understand what it is that we're even looking at when we're monitoring your files. So my approach is we're all going to be in this together. We're all on the same team. When you succeed, we succeed. So it's really as simple as that to me. And I'm going to do my best today to provide you with some guidance and some tools that will help you be successful in maintaining your files. So let's go ahead and get started. We're talking about purpose and importance of case notes, characteristics of a well-defined case note, important rules of writing case notes, privacy and confidentiality, top 3 case note issues, and sample case notes. So we have a lot to cover today. We're going to start off with the purpose and importance of case notes. Next slide. The graphic shows the constant cycle that you as a career planner maintain as you communicate with your participants. So there's a constant flow of interactions with the participants, and then that information is filtered by you, the career planner, who then interprets the interactions and then translates that information in a written form, which is your case note. So this is when it's critical to be able to articulate any problems or concerns, document progress towards goals and objectives, and just to be able to accurately tell the story. And that's what it's all about, just telling the story. So what purpose do case notes really serve? The first one listed is, again, tell the story. This includes the who, what, where, when, why, and how of your participant situation. Case notes build a better understanding of the participant by tracking interactions, documenting referrals, and documenting your decision-making processes in order to support your rationale for your decisions. So case notes help track progress and setbacks by identifying challenges and documenting how you resolve the issues with your participant. Linkage to services is important once you identify the deficiencies, so you can refer to other partners and services as needed to eliminate or greatly reduce barriers at least. Increased accountability is also important because it allows for oversight and monitoring, and it can constantly being analyzed by others, whether it's your supervisor or a state or federal monitor. And this is to ensure that the participant is being properly served. As career planners, it fulfills an ethical requirement. As you are all working in a helping profession where your focus is on supporting and nurturing the growth of your participants in order to obtain that positive outcome. So your speaking, listening, interpersonal, and problem-solving skills are all in constant motion. Because you're communicating with multiple participants on your caseload, these skills are critical in developing a good standard of practice when interacting with your participants. Let's look in more detail at those characteristics of a well-defined case note. So the categories here are clear, concise, useful, relevant, and timely. The first one on the list seems to be where we as monitors struggle sometimes. The case notes need to be written clearly enough so anyone reading your case notes can understand what's happening with your participant at any given time. And many times you know exactly what you mean, but when we as monitors review your case notes and we don't understand what you're trying to say, then that leads us trying to figure out what we think you mean. And the result of that is our interpretation may be inaccurate, simply because the content isn't clear or it's missing critical information as to what you intended to convey. So in the past, I've always trained staff to be as clear as possible when writing case notes because you never know who may be reading them, especially a state or a federal monitor. And you want the monitors to get into your file, find the information they need quickly, and then get out of it. We want the same thing. We want to find it quickly and we want to get out of it. So if we have to spend extra time trying to figure out what we think you mean, then invariably we get distracted by other things we see and we end up having more questions. So just take the time to fully write down your thoughts in a clear format. Case notes also need to be concise in as brief a format as possible. The information in your case note must be useful. Just the facts kind of approach will serve you well when writing your case notes. And they don't need a lot of extra fluff, but they do need to tell the who, what, where, when, why, and how of a situation. The content should be relevant to the situation at hand. If there are other conversations going on with your participant that aren't related to the IEP or the ISS, just only document those parts of the conversation relevant to achieving your participants' goals and objectives. They may want to tell you about their 40th birthday party coming up or whatever. And you can listen, just don't put it in the case note. The case notes must be entered in a timely manner. For most participants in situations, regular contact's defined as two-way communication that occurs every 30 days. And there should not be gaps in case note entries with more than 30 days without contact between the participant and the career planner or another staff member. So as a reminder, if you are providing a same-day service, your case note must be recorded within 10 days of the service or activity being completed. As monitors, we can see by the IWDS time and date stamp on your case notes if you are entering them in a timely manner as defined by policy. So let's look at some of the requirements in a case note. The specific details included in each case note will vary depending on what type of activity you're doing that's being recorded and your participant situation. But in general, case notes should include very specific elements. The sample on this screen is a scenario of a participant who's not been attending training as required due to childcare barriers. So when formulating this kind of case note, the case note outline should include a description, a purpose, content, outcome, and plan. In this particular case, it starts off with a description of the visit. So the participant is responding to a request from the career planner to come in for a meeting. The purpose is to discuss her lack of progress in school due to several absences. The participant states she's struggling to attend training because she doesn't have sufficient childcare as her babysitter isn't available due to personal issues. She's trying to make arrangements for a family member to watch her children, but that arrangement hasn't been confirmed yet. The outcome is that the career planner saw a need and linked her to childcare resource and referral to see if she may be eligible for subsidized childcare assistance. The plans are to reconnect in a week to verify if she's secured childcare with family or if she followed through with filling out an application to childcare resource and referral. So everything we need to know about this situation is documented. So in a week or so, we would expect to see some sort of updated case note as to how this situation was resolved. So what are we looking for in your case notes? So many times we see case note documentation about similar scenarios to this, but so much of the vital information is missing. And the body of the case note may simply say something like, customers having trouble with going to school because her babysitter quit. And that may be all that's said in the case note. The thing is, you may have provided those services and linkage, but it wasn't documented, which leads us to the famous quote at the bottom of the screen: if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So if you're providing services, problem solving, etc., document it in your case note. We have no idea what you did for your participant if you don't write it down. So please give yourself credit for all the good work you do on a daily basis to help your participants succeed. At a minimum, case notes that document services should answer the following questions in order to meet data validation. So this is at a minimum. What service was provided? What date was it provided? And were the services, and why were the services provided? So for example, if you have a participant failing math, your case note could say something like, John's not making adequate progress in math. Arrangements were made to receive individual tutoring. A voucher was prepared to cover costs, and John was provided a copy. John will attend tutoring every Wednesday at the Career Center at the college for 4 weeks. That's just an example. But if you only write John's failing math and needs tutoring in a case note, we have no idea what you've done. Another reminder at the bottom of the screen is when you provide that same-day service, you must enter it as a same-day service case note within 10 days. And this is going to be a repeating theme as we move through this presentation. So let's go over some important rules for writing case notes. First of all, record the facts accurately and completely. Behaviors you observed and statements that you heard. Don't make judgments based on what you observed. Never include opinions, stereotypical comments, any offensive statements. If you must state an opinion, make sure that you say it is your opinion, as long as it's relevant to WIOA Title I services. Use clear, simple, concise language, including professional terminology. Use free sources such as Grammarly to help you with grammar and spelling. Don't use slang, cliches, or jargon. Don't comment on details that aren't relevant to the individual's participation in Title I services. Keep documentation focused on how events in the participant's life will affect goals and objectives. And don't use discriminating statements, especially on grounds of race, age, sex, with the exception of age as it relates to youth participants. And try to avoid using abbreviations and acronyms if possible. So this next slide is an actual case note we reviewed a year or so ago. I saved this case note because it's a pretty good example of how we would not recommend that you document how you interacted with your participant. So right away, looking at the very first case note sample, we see that Stan is in big trouble. I mean, he obviously is not doing what the career planner expects of him, and she is not happy with Stan. So let's take a look here. Had a come to Jesus meeting with Stan today. He needs to better communicate. He needs to provide me with an update by the end of the week. So observe those personal feelings, those feelings of frustration from that career planner. There's a religious reference in there. So there's a lot of stuff going on in just those few sentences. So the goal is to neutralize everything, to just neutralize it with just the facts. So how can we write it in an alternate way to get the same message across in a more neutral tone and remove the emotion? So it would look something like this. I met with Stan today and discussed concerns regarding delaying completing his training program. We also discussed need for regular contact while he was participating in training. He reports he had some personal issues that prevented him from attending classes. We discussed options of either continuing with training or closing his file until a future date when his issues have been resolved and he's better able to dedicate time to attend the required classes. Stan agreed to call and update me on or before this Friday, October 2nd. Let me know if he plans to return to training. Okay, that would be a neutral way of saying it. So Friday, October 2nd, obviously came and went with no communication from Stan. So here's the next case note that was documented. He was not following through, so I dropped him. That's a little harsh. I would not recommend providing funding for him in the future or proceed very cautiously. So we still see a lot of emotion running through that note, right? The career planner seems to still be really irritated with Stan. So how could we remove that emotion from that one and turn it into a just the facts kind of case note? We could say there has been no further contact from Stan. Due to multiple delays in training and no message received by the deadline of October 2nd of his plans to return to school, I'll move forward with exiting the file. No further services planned at this time. I sent Stan a letter today and let him know his file will be closed and to contact me should he desire services in the future. So in these case note samples, we see that personal feelings and opinions are guiding the narrative in these entries. So the career planner's frustration is clear. It is so important to remain neutral. When working with adults and youth, there's bound to be conflict at times, but when a career planner states he needs to do this or he needs to do that, as it's written in this case note example, well, we all know we can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do. We just can't. And that's why detailed case notes are critical to ensure facts are included, to explain potential conflicts that may be developing. A specific plan of action is also necessary to add in the case note to ensure the career planner and the participant are working together to reach a resolution if at all possible. So here's the best advice I can give after years of experience. Always remember to believe in the good of people. If a participant's not doing what you expect, just do your best to guide them back to partnering with you within the boundaries of the program, but always extend grace when you can. And more importantly, recognize the value that you have to help make a difference in a successful outcome for your participants. You are truly that important in this journey. Let's take a look now at privacy and confidentiality examples. What happens sometimes with a career planner, in your attempt to tell the whole story, you may inadvertently include information of a sensitive nature. And there are privacy laws in place to protect your participants. So you want to be very mindful to not include sensitive topics on this list within the body of your case notes. So you as a career planner are responsible for maintaining that privacy and confidentiality. So WIOA Policy Chapter 822, Privacy and Security, provides guidelines for protecting participant privacy. So on this slide, there are just a few samples of subjects not to include in your case note. Probably the most common breach of confidentiality that we see as monitors pertains to medical issues, but several topics on this list have also been observed during monitoring. So we've got some examples of living arrangements, relationship status, finances, health, medical, psychiatric, addictions, domestic violence, cultural practices, criminal history, violations of the law, religious beliefs, gender identity, and political preferences. So these are good examples of what not to put in writing. The next slide is an actual case note sample of this that I came across. So when formulating your case note, always be careful to not accidentally disclose the medical information. It's okay to make a general statement regarding a medical or disability issue, just don't provide specifics about these sensitive topics. Summarize the information for the purpose of addressing potential barriers only, and avoid specific details that could be considered a breach in confidentiality. So let's take a look at these two samples. The first one with the big red X on it is what we wouldn't want you to write, but it did get written, and this is an actual case note. Mary called and said she will need to reschedule our meeting on 1/21/22 because she has a doctor's appointment at the same time as our meeting to treat a severe rash on her body. We rescheduled for next week. Now, did you really need to document that she had a severe rash on her body? No, we don't need to know that. Now, she's going to tell you that, but you don't have to put it in your case note. So how can we reword it to eliminate that sensitive information? Just simply, Mary called and said she would need to reschedule our meeting on 1/21/22 because she has a doctor's appointment at the same time, period. A new appointment was scheduled for 1/28/22. So even if your participants tell you personal information, which they will do quite frequently, just don't include it in your case note if it's not relevant to goals and objectives. There is, next slide, there is an exception in the event that you feel additional information about a particular case note is relevant to your decision-making process when serving the customer's needs. So there's an option to make a case note confidential so that you as the career planner are the only one that can view it. And this slide shows what your traditional case note screen looks like when you're preparing to enter a case note. So the drop-down box next to confidential, the confidential line always defaults to no, but you do have that option to change it to a yes if you feel it's necessary to document additional information. But if you're unsure as to whether you should enter a confidential case note, discuss it with your supervisor and make a decision as whether it's even necessary. And if you come to the conclusion it is, try to be as brief as possible in the explanation and always have the protection of privacy for your participant in the forefront of your mind at all times. All right, let's go ahead and move on to take a closer look at the top 3 case note issues identified in monitoring. So over the past 2 or 3 monitoring cycles, we've seen a sort of pattern developing across the state in which there were 3 prominent areas of concern regarding case note documentation. The same 3 issues continue to crop up in multiple monitoring events at times led to LVs receiving findings when these issues were identified. So we're going to break these 3 areas of concern down in the next few slides. The first one here, the number 1 case note issue, is the significant delays in entering case notes, as well as batching of case notes. So this has been occurring so often in multiple LWIAs. So let's break this down and try to understand it together. Let's first look at the definition of batching. So the definition of batching occurs when a career planner enters multiple case notes into the IWDS system all at the same time for past services performed over a period of many weeks, months, and sometimes even years we've seen. The date and timestamp will reflect multiple delinquencies for case notes not being entered in a timely manner. So batching of case notes is very strongly discouraged, as observations of this practice during monitoring may result in a programmatic finding. When we take a closer look at WIOA Policy Chapter 4, Section 2.72a, we are reminded case notes and file maintenance are vital to quality service and reporting, and they reflect the results of continuous career planning in detail so that the participant status is easily determined. So for case notes with an open active service, there must be ongoing 2-way communication going on there, and case notes must be entered in an appropriate case management system within 10 days of the service delivery, and the regular contact typically 30 days. So let's take a look at a sample of this on the next slide to better clarify what batching looks like. This IWDS case note screenshot is an example of delays in case note entries and batching of case notes. So as you can see, the first few entries were entered in a timely manner, starting at the bottom on 11/8/19. If you look at the created column on the far right, you can see that the case note was actually entered 10 days later on 11/18/19. The 12/12/2019 same-day service case note is the beginning of when entry started to become delinquent. The same-day service case note on 12/12/2019 was not entered until 9/17/20, over 9 months later. And remember, this is supposed to be entered within 10 days. There was no case note entered for the month of January 2020, and the next 4 case notes for 2/20/20, 3/30/20, 4/15/20, and 5/20/20 were all entered on the same day. In other words, batched together on the same day of 9/17/20, reflecting a significant data lag for all of those entries. So when monitoring, we are not just looking at your case notes, we're also comparing your case note dates to the actual time date stamp of your entries In order to determine if compliance is being met for entering your case notes within 10 days of providing a same-day service or every 30 days for general case note entries as policy requires. So remember, I said we're trying to get to the yes answer in our monitoring questions, right? So for example, let's say I'm trying to answer the monitoring question that states, there's documentation reflecting meaningful two-way communication is occurring within a 90-day time frame. Okay, that's one of our questions. Or there's documentation that reflects the customer's attending training. That's another question. Those are going to be really hard to answer yes in this example. How do you think I'm going to have to answer that? I'm going to have to answer it as no for either one of those questions. And when we answer no to any monitoring question, it triggers a finding. Because remember, you're supposed to be documenting something every 30 days. And if there's no services provided within 90 days, then what are you supposed to be doing? Well, you either try to engage their customer back into services, or you move towards exiting. And none of that happened here. But I can tell you what did happen. When we sent the list of samples to the LWIA and this participant name was on the list, the assigned career planner went in to check this file to prepare for monitoring and realized he had not entered in meaningful two-way case notes since November 2019. So we hurried and stuck in multiple case notes on September 17, 2020. But it was too late by then, because when he added these, we can now see that he batched all of those notes on the same day just by looking at those time and date stamps. So these were so delinquent. So he obviously was not staying in contact with the participant every 30 days or entering in same-day service entries within 10 days as required. So we're trying to decide what's causing it. You know, what's causing this to happen all the time. So let's look at some barriers and solutions to significant delays in case note entries and batching. When we broke this issue down to try to understand the reasons behind why it might be happening, we came up with some ideas. So on the left, we've identified some potential barriers, such as career planners finding the time to complete case notes, work balance, time management. So many of you work out in the field, maybe with youth in work experience or securing contracts for OJT, for example. You may not be in the office regularly and find yourself falling behind on getting your case notes completed. But the result of delaying entering case notes for too long most certainly compromises the quality of your case notes. And some career planners don't have an understanding of time-sensitive requirements for case note entries. They may have never been trained on the 10-day requirement for same-day service or the 30-day requirements for case note entries. Career planner attributes, which is simply your personality characteristics, which influences your desire to succeed at work, establish good work habits, and the ability to recognize distractions and just move them out of your way to accomplish your goals in the workplace. So what are some solutions? Well, if you find yourself falling behind in your case notes and aren't able to enter case notes on a daily basis, which is the best practice, talk with your supervisor and set aside a designated time each week to enter all your case notes from that week's activities. Completing these in a timely manner on a regular basis every week will definitely prevent data lag in your entries. Request additional technical assistance from your supervisor so that you have a good understanding of what time-sensitive requirements need to be applied when entering in your case notes, and utilize samples provided by the state as a sample to writing a good case note. I'm going to show you those in a little bit at the end of the presentation. Also, you can run reports in the IPAT system with an Illinois WorkNet on a weekly basis to help you keep your caseloads under control. So for those of you that aren't familiar with IPATs, IPATs is an acronym for Illinois Performance Accountability and Transparency System. It can be accessed by using your Illinois WorkNet username and password. And this system provides the most accurate and up-to-date information for your participants. So the LWIA directors, supervisors, and the staff should all have access to the IPAT system within Illinois WorkNet to run frequent reports and to ensuring consistency and quality of services. And if you don't have an Illinois WorkNet account already set up, you'll need to do that in order to have access to IPATS. Standing meetings should also be scheduled with career planners to review and discuss strategies that follow WIOA Policy 4.2, career planning policy guidance, in order to increase the efficacy of program and participant outcomes. So this is a sample screen of IPATS, and this is reflecting results for the whole state. Okay, this is the whole state just a couple of weeks ago. These numbers have improved over the last few months, but we still have some work to do. As monitors, we're constantly looking at the big picture for the whole state, just to see how things are going across the board. So when we take a closer look at this, we're looking to see if there is a more systemic issue across the state for case notes not being entered in a timely manner, or services not being provided as required by policy. Because case note delinquencies and lack of services being provided have both been identified in several LWIAs during monitoring, it was determined we needed a more in-depth training for case notes, and that's what led us here today. The good thing is these reports can be filtered down to just look at your own LWIA, but most importantly, it can be filtered way down even further to see your own individual career planner reports. So we recommend that you run your own individual reports weekly to stay on top of your caseloads. Multiple reports are available for you to run, as you can see in this iPad screen. But there are other reports besides these that can also be a benefit to you in iPads. They are the best tools that you have right at your fingertips to assist you in catching issues early by updating your case note entries in a timely manner to prevent delinquencies, avoid potential data lags, and ultimately prevent findings during monitoring. I think there'll be more IPATS training coming up in the near future. Okay, let's move on to look at the number 2 case note issue, which is the misuse or the lack of use of same-day service entries. So there's so much confusion around same-day service case note entries. So let's talk about the difference between same-day service case notes and general case notes. Every time you get ready to enter a case note, you have to make a decision as to what type of case note needs to be entered. Well, how do you do that? Let's look at the definitions. Same-day services are those staff-assisted activities that are completed in one day. The same activity could be delivered again on one or more additional days, but each occurrence is considered another episode. And a general case note is all other activities with the customer or on behalf of the customer that do not constitute a service as defined by the goals and objectives on the IEP or the ISS. So what are some barriers that we identified and potential solutions for misuse or lack of use of same-day service entries? Well, some of the barriers include some of the case notes are documented as same-day service, but the case note does not reflect a specific connection to any service or activity. Other case notes are clearly same-day service contacts, but the case note is entered as a general case note only. And when you enter it this way, it prevents IWDS from auto-updating the end date on the service line, potentially causing the participant to appear as if he or she has not received any services at all. Difficulty in determining type of contact, such as same-day service communication versus a general two-way communication case note entry, where case notes are unclear if communication with the participant actually occurred. We struggle so much with that as monitors to try to figure out if you talked to them, you didn't talk to them. Sometimes it's really hard to tell. Lack of knowledge on how to enter a same-day case note and not entering same-day service case notes at all, which we've observed when monitoring. So some of the solutions when services are provided, always enter case notes as a same-day service through the service screen. Use the add additional episode button to enter it. And this process then resets the end date automatically and keeps the service date current. Use the note subject line to clarify what occurred and as to whether it is a same-day service or in which service activities were provided or a general entry that was not connected to a service. Review current state training PowerPoints on Illinois WorkNet, and they include step-by-step instructions on how to enter a same-day service. Ask for technical assistance either from your supervisor, or we can also provide additional technical assistance if needed in your area. So the following examples do constitute a WIOA Title I service and should be entered as a same-day service case note. So on this screen, we're following along with WIOA Policy Chapter 4, Section 2.6, Service Documentation. And all WIOA Title I services provided to a participant must be entered in the appropriate case management system within 10 calendar days of the service delivery. So some examples on this list are same-day services, and these are things that you do all the time and should be entered as a same-day service. Completing intakes, assessment, testing, development of IEPs, engaging in two-way communication, which includes discussion of progress, changes, or concerns as related to goals and objectives, reviewing class schedules, book lists, preparing tuition and book vouchers, verifying enrollment in transportation, childcare, obtaining signatures for required documents, discussing supportive service requests, preparing payment vouchers for supplies, services, and tools, receiving attendance records from the participant, reviewing them for accuracy, then calculating a process for mileage reimbursement, conferring with the participant to discuss barriers to achieving goals and objectives and providing linkage, assisting the participant with job search, job referral and placement and relocation, conducting on-site visits for work experience on the job training participants to assess progress as related to goals and objectives, and communicating with the participant when conducting 90-day IEP and ISS reviews. So those should all be entered. All those examples should be entered as same-day services. So per WIOA Policy Chapter 4, Section 2.6, the service screen must reflect all of the services that have been or are currently being provided to the participant. Service records must be closed or ended with an indication of completion, successful, unsuccessful within 10 days of learning of the completion of the service. Outcomes of education and training services such as credentials and measurable skill gains must be entered within 10 days of learning of the attainment. And for Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership providers that use Career Connect as a case management system, guidance on data entry specific to Career Connect can be found at the link in the Resources tab, but all data entry time requirements addressed in this policy must also be followed by career planners using Career Connect. All documentation must be contained in the participant's physical file and be available for review as requested for monitoring. And then if your file's chosen for monitoring, you would be uploading all relevant documents into IWDS so that they're available for remote monitoring and data validation. So you wouldn't do that with everybody, just the people that we are reviewing. So the following examples on this screen do not constitute a WIOA Title I service, nor contact with a participant, and should be entered as a general case note only. So some of those examples are speaking with a participant's relatives, sending flyers, letters, emails, speaking with a participant's probation or parole officer, having a casual, unrelated conversation with your participant that has nothing to do with their goals and objectives, having the participant simply bring in time and attendance records for payment when no meaningful service discussion or guidance was provided. So if they're just coming in and dropping down their attendance record and you're not speaking with them and you're not processing anything for payment, then that would just be a general case note. Sending contact me, contact our office's messages, attempts to contact through email or phone, they're just general. You're not providing a service. General contact with the participant or employer to only obtain information regarding his or her employment status, educational progress status, need for services, income support payments. So again, there has to be meaningful service provided before you would ever enter it as a same-day case note. And any kind of commentary, opinions on participants' personal circumstances unrelated to employment and training activities. So just always enter them as a general case note. One of the most frequent errors we see is the career planner's attempt to contact a case note and documenting it as a same-day service case note in error. We see that quite often. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. And it is an actual case note sample we came across during monitoring. So this first actual case note was an attempt to contact the participant. It's on the incorrect side, okay? This is an incorrect entry. So as you can see on the left side, this represents how the case note was incorrectly entered. Remember, when choosing to use the note category of same-day service, you must actually be providing a service. So as we've learned, attempting to contact a participant is not considered a same-day service, as there were no services provided. When monitors see a same-day service case note entered and the note subject says contact, well, we would expect to see that you actually made contact with the participant and provided a service. But as you can see from the case note itself, it simply states called and left message. So how should an attempt to contact be correctly recorded? Let's look at the right side of the screen for the correct entry. First, you would enter the note category as general since you did not provide a service. The note subject line would be expanded then to state attempt to contact for December 2021, rather than just saying contact, because there was no contact. And the body of the case note would also be expanded to explain the message left for the participant, which was called Morgan, left a message requesting to return my call to provide me with an update on progress in school. Okay, let's look at another example. This is contact with participant for a training update. So on the left side, again, we're looking at an incorrect entry. It is recorded as a same-day service. The note subject just says contact, and the case note just says client still in school. So as you can see there, when we're looking at it, we're looking for actual service, and we assume that there's some kind of contact. Because that's what the note subject says, but when we get down to the body, it just says client still in school. So we have no idea what you've done. The correct entry on the right side is same-day service entry, but the note subject line has been expanded to say school update, March 2021, and request for calculator, because that's actually what did happen on that day. Once we got to looking a little closer. So the case note should have read something like this: called and talked to Cindy today about her progress for spring 21 semester. Cindy reports she's current on her homework assignments and maintaining A's and B's in her classes. She has no concerns at this time, but states she's needing a scientific calculator. A supportive service voucher was prepared for the calculator, and Cindy will come in tomorrow to sign the voucher and take it to the bookstore. She remains on track to complete training and continues making satisfactory progress in her classes. Okay, let's go on to one more slide here. And these are attendance records, samples, and the incorrect entry that we saw was a same-day service again. It was listed in the note subject as update. So again, we're looking for a service since you entered it that way, and we're looking for some sort of update that you have to say. And the case note just said received attendance. So we have no idea what you did. If you provided a service, you didn't say that you did. So remember, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So there's no services that looks like this provided, and there's no update that we can see that's of meaningful significance anyway. So the correct entry would be same-day service entry. Note subject is expanded to say October 2021 attendance processed. So when we see that, then we see that there's something that's happened and that you provided a service. And it would look something like this. Jess stopped by the office and turned in her October attendance record. Attendance record reflects she attended all required classes, completed mileage calculations, and sent form to be processed for reimbursement. And Jess continues to progress successfully in training, remains on track to complete her program within the projected end date. That makes sense to us. Now we can see that you did something, you provided a service, and we know exactly what's going on now. Okay, and the third case note issue in the top 3 case note areas of concern is that case notes are missing required content and there's no chronological order to the notes. So case notes lack reason for contact, action taken, and progress plan for the next steps. There's a lack of order to when services were provided with no connection back to goals and objectives. So during our programmatic monitorings, we've observed this so often where there's no specific rhyme or reason to how case notes are even being entered. Then many times there may be an initial brief case note regarding intake, but then suddenly with the next case note entry, there's this huge time jump where the career planner is suddenly talking about receiving attendance from the customer for a training program. We're like, wait, why? It's missing all the guts, the meat and potatoes of all the in-between requirements. The documentation's missing of your decision-making process for enrollment into services. So at times, there's no record in the case notes discussing determination of eligibility, assessment and testing, determination of services, IEP development, ISS development, determination of eligibility for training, and sometimes we can't even find that there's written documentation or validation in the IEP or the ISS for why a participant was even enrolled in a certain service. So there's nothing for us to go on when we try to figure out how you can conclude that the participant even needed a particular service if you aren't putting in very specific and required case notes. So next slide, we have identified some barriers and solutions for case notes missing content and no chronological order. Lack of training on how to properly formulate a case note to include required components could be a barrier. Lack of training on entering case notes in chronological order to validate decision-making processes of the participants' enrollment into services, and copying and pasting the same case notes each month. Why are the reasons why it's happening? I mean, this is what happens. And the bad habit of copying and pasting the exact same case note in month after month after month, please avoid doing this. The entries must be specific to the progress for each of your participants, and these cookie cutter type of case notes should never be entered. So one example of a cookie cutter type case note would be every month, the career planner adds a case note with a note subject that just says update, and then the body of the case note just says customer still attending training. And that just tells us absolutely nothing if you're entering that month after month after month. So don't do that. Avoid cookie cutter case notes and avoid those one word note subject lines like contact or update. Expand your note subject line to explain what you're actually doing. Another thing that's happening are these monthly copied and pasted blanket letters or emails in your case notes that aren't really applicable to some of your participants. So blanket case notes, this just means that you're sending out to all your registrants. All of your registrants on your caseload are getting this letter or email every month. And this can cause havoc for a state monitor when these kinds of correspondence don't match with the rest of your case notes, because we're thinking, wait a minute, I thought I just read that person graduated. Why are they being sent a letter or an email to come in for more vouchers for the next semester? It's just so confusing. So then what happens is we spend a lot of time backtracking, trying to figure out what's going on and what you're doing. So from this day forward, just pay attention to the content of those blanket type of monthly emails or letters that you're sending to your participants, and don't send them to those participants to whom the content no longer applies. So what's a good solution for this? Well, to develop a good quality case note, the easiest format to remember is the RAP method. And it is a little bit more of a condensed version that includes R, reason for contact, A, action taken, and P, plans or progress. So in the next slide, let's look and see what that RAP method of writing a case note looks like when we put it into action. So in this case note, it's entered as a same-day service based on the services provided. As you can see, the note subject line is also specific to the services provided. The case note clearly identifies the reason for the contact, which is the participant bringing in his fall grades, and also the participant is in need of a spring voucher for the upcoming semester. He also needs a supportive service for a supply. And the action was that the career planner verified all spring classes were on the curriculum and then issued the vouchers for tuition and fees, and also completed a supportive service voucher for the supply. Measurable skills gains were completed. Progress for this participant is satisfactory with a GPA of 3.9. And the plan is for him to continue in the HVAC program. He's on track to complete training within the time period projected on his IEP. So everything we need to know is captured using the RAP method. It's pretty easy format. When writing your case note, be specific as to what type of contact you had with your participant. So there's acceptable ways of contacts are phone calls, emails, social media, text messaging, in-person contact, and virtual meetings. So just let us know in your subject line or your case note how you are communicating with your participant. That will give us a heads up that you're actually having some sort of two-way communication with your participant. And one more quote, this time from the anonymous lawyer who cautions, dance like no one is watching, but text and email like it will be read in court one day. There's a lot of truth to that. So when you are using text messages and emails to communicate, just be mindful of the content you're putting out there into the universe. This screen's just a helpful hint. It's just kind of a cheat sheet in order to preserve emails that are sent from your participants. So instead of paraphrasing what a participant's email said in your case note, trying to rewrite it or reword it, simply pull up the participant's email, hit reply, just hit reply. And this automatically condenses that participant's email down to a format that can be easily copied and pasted into a case note. And the time date stamp is all on there in one nice, neat, condensed version. It's just a simple hack to make things easier for you, so you're not paraphrasing or recreating an email. Just a easy cheat. All right, let's move on to review WIOA Policy 4.2.7, which pertains to case notes, and how this policy comes into effect when developing content for required case notes. And we'll also look at some case note samples. We've already addressed several areas of this policy, which include importance of file maintenance, documenting two-way communication, timeline for when same-day services need to be entered, cross-coordination of services, linkage, and the importance of writing quality case notes. So just use this screen as a reference to look back on should you need to. We've talked about most of those things. And in addition to all of those requirements, the case note history must request the following information. So there should be an introduction, which is a complete description of the status of the individual participation, including explanation of their overall need for services. It elaborates on eligibility, intake, assessment results to give a clear picture of barriers, strengths and skills, training preferences, etc. Determination of training need. The career planner must document the suitability of training in a retraining program with participants' needs. So that's really important, and that's going to be more clear as we look at the samples. Training begin date, we need to have that in a case note, the training end date, and service closure and exit, and follow-up. So all of those things will be included in case notes. And it'll be more clear as we take a little bit closer look at some of the sample case notes. So I've created 3 sample case notes for you for this training, which will guide you on the right path to thoroughly and accurately documenting critical areas that must be included in your case note documentation. So these 3 case note samples are very detailed, and they capture the required content necessary in order to validate your reasons for enrolling a participant into services. So let's take a look at these case note samples. We're looking at intake eligibility determination, assessment and testing, determination of services, and the development of an IEP. Those are the 3 I chose to create some samples for you. So suggestions for using the samples are to keep a folder on your desktop and just refer to these samples when you first begin working with a participant. But keep in mind, these are suggested samples only. So if you want to create your own local samples for these same types of case notes that follow your own local procedures for enrolling new participants, that's perfectly fine. However, you will want to make sure that the components of the sample case notes in this presentation are also captured in your own local samples as well. Let's go back to, yeah, there you go. So let's look at this chapter 4, section 2.2 case management. This is just a general overview of the requirements for the intake eligibility case note. And this case note is critical because it documents registration to IWDS, and it will be reviewed during monitoring and data validation activities. So many times during monitoring, this case note is missing entirely. So we need to get back on track with getting this documented the right way in IWDS. And this initial case note must contain why the participant's being enrolled in services, what future activities and services will be provided, the adult and dislocated worker participants, the participating enrolling services, and what other services were provided on the same day of the participation date. And for youth participants, objective assessment and individual service strategy on the first youth element provided. So we're going to be looking for some of those components in these samples coming up here. Okay, now we're ready for the next slide. So this is your first sample, which is an intake eligibility determination case note for a 1A participant. As you can see, the format is fill in the blank. So for every participant, this will look different depending on your participant's circumstances. As you can see in reading through the sample, right off the bat, eligibility determination is stated clearly in the first paragraph. And as you read on, you can see that demographics of the participant were provided in the next paragraph, with the next section stating what the customer is seeking services for. Education, results, basic skills screening tool, and referrals are also addressed there. If the participant expresses an interest in training, the career planner is required to provide the participant with the ETPL state provider list in order to ensure the participant is made aware of all their options before making a final decision for training. So even though a participant comes in and expresses they already know what they want to do, their career planner is still obligated to share that list. And the final paragraph is acknowledging the application has been completed and paperwork signed with plans to meet again. And wrap things up, a list of services provided and also a list of any future services to potentially be provided. So here's what we're going to do. For clarification of this process and for training purposes only, we're going to follow a fictional participant named Jess to see what the final results of filling in the blanks of these case notes would look like. So in this slide, we see the final result with all of Jess's information completed by using the sample fill in the blanks case note. So what do we learn about Jess now that the blanks have been filled in? Well, she meets eligibility for 1A because she receives SNAP benefits. She brought in all of her required documentation. She works part-time. She's a single parent. She's not a veteran. She's interested in training to become an LPN. Her basic skills screening tool reflects she does not have basic skills deficiencies and no referrals planned. She was given a copy of the EPTL training provider list. The application was completed and signatures obtained on all required documents. follow-up appointments was scheduled, and services provided were documented, as well as potential future services. So that's what it would look like when you fill in all the blanks. Okay, let's look at the second sample, how to create a summary of assessment and testing determination of services case note. So there's a definite art to case note writing, but where do you start when you have to develop a comprehensive assessment case note that requires an abundance of information? There's just so much that goes into it. Well, you start at the beginning. So first thing you're going to do is review the participant's assessment and test results. And develop, first thing you need to know is you need to understand what those test results mean. You have to have a good understanding of the results and what the scores mean. And if you don't understand that, look for the interpretation within the assessment or ask a supervisor for assistance. But it's very important that you interpret the data correctly so you can begin to develop an employment and training plan for the participant. Next, you're going to extract that information from your assessment and testing results that you want to include in your case note. This could include aptitude scores, interest abilities. You will be utilizing this information to start building your comprehensive case note. Review the information you obtained from conducting an in-depth interview with your participant, and this additional information will assist you in making determinations regarding your participant's service needs. Now you're going to analyze all of those results together to get a complete picture. There must be a clear conclusion once you've reviewed, and this information will validate your decision-making process regarding services you plan to enroll your participant in. Now you're ready to start creating a comprehensive assessment case note based on all the data you've reviewed. Consider using the state sample for summary of assessment and testing to ensure that all relevant information is included to clearly validate your decisions. So all of this has to be completed first before you can even begin to create a summary case note of your findings. So let's look at the next slide as an example. Let's view an assessment tool called Career Scope, and we're going to take a closer look at this process. So remember, we are assessing a fictional participant named Jess, who wants to be an LPN. So for training purposes, let's take a look at the results of Jess's Career Scope to see how well she did and how this plays an important role in determining whether she's even suitable for training and whether her aptitude scores and test scores support her choice of enrollment into LPN training. Several LWIAs use Career Scope, but other LWIAs may use a similar type of aptitude and interest assessment. So in that case, simply extract similar information from the assessments used in your local area. So in the slide, the first screen represents Jess's interests and also her aptitude scores. So remember, she wants to be an LPN, so keep that in mind when we review these results. I've highlighted her top 3 interests. Her highest score is humanitarian, which falls right in line with her interest in wanting to be a nurse. And the second highest score is scientific. The third is protective. So far, so good, as her interests line up with her desire to go into nursing. The second set of scores are Jess's aptitude scores. And one of the most important scores in this section is her general learning ability score, which is 84, which is on the low end of average. This score is most closely tied to success in school, so it is very important to pay attention to this score. We don't want to set Jess up to fail. So we'll keep the score in the back of our minds as we analyze the rest of her results. The good news is she has a very high score in numerical aptitude, almost off the charts. So this is very encouraging. Second highest score is spatial aptitude, and third is clerical perception, with both falling into the average range. So far, Jess is looking pretty good, but we need to look at more information. The next slide actually has definitions of the interest built into the test. So if you remember, her number 1 interest was humanitarian. Humanitarian is highlighted toward the bottom of the slide. So if you look over to the occupational column all the way to the right for humanitarian, you will clearly see that the word nurse is listed there. So that's looking pretty good. The next slide spells out the definitions for Jess's aptitude scores. So you see at the top where the general learning ability aptitude is highlighted, the top left. The definition to the right of that states the ability to catch on, understand instructions, ability to reason and make judgments, closely related to doing well in school. That is why we're looking at the big picture for Jess, because she scores a little low within the average range. But for numerical reasoning, remember, she scored extremely high. So this will serve her well when training to become a nurse. And third, her score in clerical reasoning was average. And as you can see in this description, this is the ability to perceive pertinent detail in verbal or tabular material. So an example would be to check work order specifications for errors. This will also serve her well when performing as a nurse. Now I'm feeling a little better. I'm feeling much better about making a determination as to whether Jess is a good candidate for nursing. This next screen reflects recommendations for occupations based on Jess's current aptitudes, interest, and skills level. The black dots represent occupations that she already has enough skills for to be able to perform successfully in those types of jobs. But if you look at the far right column and count down 5 spaces from the top, you will see there is no black dot for nurses. That is exactly what you need to see, as this represents the participant has a definite skills gap in what skills she currently has versus what she needs in order to become a nurse. So now you are most likely able to justify putting her into a training program based on all of the elements we just reviewed. The only other components to complete your assessment is to review the test scores for math and reading and the application and look for any barriers during your in-depth interview that may prevent Jess from becoming a licensed practical nurse. For example, if Jess answered the application question yes for having a felony, that could put a huge glitch in your plans to enroll her in a medical program and could literally stop her in her tracks. She could attend the training most likely, but she would not be able to get a job as a nurse with a felony unless there was some waiver allowed, which that's hard to get. So this is when you would have to redirect possibly to another type of training if for some reason that happened. So make sure you are looking at the whole picture, which includes analyzing assessments, test scores, reviewing answers from your in-depth interview, application answers before making decisions on placing a participant into training. Now that we've gathered all the pertinent information for this participant and analyzed results of assessment test and the in-depth interview, we're ready to start building our summary case note for assessment and testing and also making our determination for services. So this is a sample fill in the blank case note specifically designed for this purpose. So as you can see, results of assessment, testing, and in-depth interview are addressed at the beginning of this case note. You'll also see references to identifying transferable skills, the completion of a budget worksheet, determination of suitable employment, identifying barriers, specific information about chosen training program, labor market information, documentation of services to be provided, and filing for financial aid. It is a very comprehensive and detailed fill in the blank case note. Let's take a look at the next slide and see what that looks like with everything filled in for Jess. So this slide is the result after filling in the blanks of the sample summary of assessment and testing and determination of services. All of your documentation is included, and most importantly, it supports your decision to enroll Jess into a training program. It is a very detailed case note that meets federal and state requirements for completing a thorough assessment prior to enrollment into services. It's a lot of information on there. Okay, next slide, we are looking at a sample fill in the blank for development of an IEP. So this case note sample covers suitable employment is either available, not available, barriers are addressed, training details are included, setting of short and long-term goals, inclusion of how the customer envisions his or her success after completion of training, listing of services, projected start end dates for training, estimated costs, and 90-day IEP reviews. There's a lot going on in there as well. So the next slide, let's take a look at. And as you can see, all of those fill in the blanks are now completed with all of the demographics in there. And it flows very, very smoothly. So anybody reading this is going to understand exactly where your customer is at and what kind of services that you have planned. So here's the thing, if you can just spend the extra time to get these critical case notes right at the very beginning, it will go a long way to setting the tone for how the rest of your case notes will fall into place. They will be chronological, they will meet state and federal guidelines, and they will validate your decision-making processes for enrolling your participants into services. This way, no matter who reads your case notes, we will all now be able to follow your path in telling the story for each of your participants. And the last, not the last, but getting towards the end here, I know that Jim Potts has done some training on exit, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but I do want to relate it to what the requirements are for case note writing. We're looking at WIOA section 677-150C, and so it reminds us that the exit date is the last date of service, and the last day of service cannot be determined until at least 90 days have elapsed since the participant last received services. Services don't include self-service information only services or activities or follow-up services. This also requires there are no plans to provide the participant with future services. So let's go on to the next slide here for case note requirements. And I'm specifically focusing on those 90 days prior to exit procedures. So it's critically important when planning participant exits that career planners enter in the appropriate type of case note for the 90-day period prior to exit. So if a career planner's determined that the participant needs no further staff assisted service, it's extremely important during this 90-day time period that case notes are not entered via the mechanism add additional episode for same day service records, because adding in this way, it extends the last date of service. So same day service case notes are tied to active service only and will extend participation. So if you add one of the same day services during your 90-day follow-up, you'll have to start the 90-day all over again because you say that you provided a service. So you want to avoid that and enter in general case notes only during this 90-day time period when no services are being provided, since these general entries do not impact or reset the last date of service. And follow-up services may immediately start following the last date of service. If it is expected, the participant will not receive any future services other than follow-up. There are a few exclusions and where you can just exit them right away, and they're on the right of the screen there. And it says institutionalized, which would be including incarcerations, any kind of institution where the participant's stay is expected to be over 90 days. Any kind of medical issue that's expected to continue over 90 days if the participant is deceased. Reservists recalled to active duty, and it's expected he's going to be called to active duty for at least 90 days. Or foster care youth, where the youth is in foster care system and has moved from the local workforce area. So those are exclusions that you could exit right away. Otherwise, you will be doing those 90-day reviews. And sometimes there's confusion over what you're supposed to actually be writing in there during that 90-day time period for general case notes only. So you're not providing services, right? So you're still communicating with your participant during this time. So what are you going to write about? Well, most of the times we see verification of employment. You're just trying to verify, their new job, their hours worked, or rate of pay, that sort of thing. Or you're inquiring on a current job search or how employment is going, providing a job lead, maybe telling them about a job fair, labor market information, providing a referral if they need a community resource, general counseling, resume development, discussion of any work-related concerns. So just document for the 90 days under general case notes, and then you're ready to exit. And remember, the exit date will be retroactive back to the last date of service. Okay, so additional technical assistance is available. The state can provide additional sample case notes on request. And LEAs can also create their own sample case notes. So when creating sample case notes, be sure to follow the guidelines as to what verbiage is required. Some sample case notes that you might want to consider writing up would be job search assistance, work experience, occupational skills training, on the job training, workshops, group activities, any kind of case note that you feel like needs to be definitely formatted so that everybody's getting all the correct information in there. You can create whatever you want to. So on the next few slides, these are just self-review. These are guidelines for creating your own templates. So if you want to go ahead and take a crack at doing a fill in the blank and making up your own, you can do them. You've got job search assistance, workshops, work experience, and you've got all of the requirements underneath that you would need to be able to formulate your own sample case notes or templates. Next slide. Here's one for occupational skills training. You might want to do one just for that. And it's got all of the elements that need to be in that case note. So make sure if you're creating something like that, that you're following along with this guideline, making sure that you get all of those things in there. And the next slide is on the job training, supportive services. So all of those elements are in there, requirements for that case note. And slide 59, let's see, we've got incentive payments for youth, maybe you want to do a case note on, and partner service referrals. So those are just a handful of ones that you might want to consider. And even if you don't want to create a template, you can go ahead and have this as a guide sheet when you're writing your case notes. You can always refer back to it, make sure that you're capturing all of those requirements in there. All right, I think we made it to the end. So we're going to move on to questions now. And don't know if there's, okay. Hi, Kirsten.
Oh, hi. So there are so many questions. I'm not sure if we'll have time to get to all of them, but we do have a couple minutes here, and I will save the chat. Anything that we don't address, we can send out an FAQ after the webinar. So Mark Denson would like to know, how do we address living arrangements, criminal history, disability as a part of eligibility at times?
Yeah, sometimes there's grants that are specific to that type of eligibility, and those, again, we still have to respect the requirements for keeping confidential information safe. So one of the things is that you're keeping any hard copies separate from your customer file, and they're locked up. They need to be locked up if you have any sensitive information. As far as writing them in a case note, you can always utilize that confidential case note button if it's related to the guidelines of the grant, and it's specific to opioids or anything like that, then it has to be addressed somehow. But I would just be really cautious to put that in a case note where everybody could view it. And that might be one of those occasions where you would put that as a confidential case note.
Okay. If Jennifer wants to know also, are case notes, do they not need to be written in third person?
We've seen them all different ways.
She was direct.
Most of the time they're written in first person, but there's a lot of LWIAs that write in third person. Case manager did this, case manager did that. I don't know that there's any certain rule to that. I've never seen one. I would just say, as long as I understand what you're saying, it doesn't bother me that you're writing in third person. But if you have a local policy, that's the thing. If you have a local policy that wants you to write it in a specific format, then just follow that.
James Willis says, I have a question regarding using marital status. In an earlier slide, it was indicated that the relationship status was sensitive information and to be put in a case note. In your case note, and not to be put in a case note. In your case note example, you did give the marital status. What is the correct way?
Well, again, I think it's just, if it's related back to goals and objectives, it's already, I'm trying to think if it's in the application itself. I haven't entered an application in a while. That could be in there. But again, we're just following the guidelines and trying to avoid putting that out there, in a written form. If it's already in the application and part of the application, that's acceptable. But if you, if you're calculating income and that sort of thing, then all those things will be captured in different areas. So I don't know that specifically you would have to avoid a marital status necessarily, but you just want to be mindful of it, because it just depends what kind of marital status it is, I guess, as to whether you would be considered if you're infringing on the privacy of the customer. Because just remember, everybody can read those case notes. So if you're putting it in a confidential case note, not everybody can see it. And that's something I would recommend to talk further with your supervisor on, just to make sure that you have clarification on that and what to write and what not to write.
Right, thank you. What happens when you go back and edit a case note for clarity upon exit or during a review that would reset the timestamp and make it look like your case notes were out of compliance?
To my knowledge, when you go into IWDS and you have to go in and edit a case note, it will not change I don't think it changes your time and date stamp if you go back in and edit a case note that you've already entered in a timely manner. So that's not an issue. If you've already entered it and you go back and change some words or add a little blurb to it, it's not going to change that original time and date stamp. So we would not even know that, really. We would not know that you went back in and edited it, because it doesn't change it. It's only when you start adding case notes that you've never had in there at all that we can see the delays. Because if you're entering something today on 4/27 for something that happened in December of 2021, we're going to see it, because it'll say that you entered the 12/27/21 case note on 4/27/22, and then we can see there's a delay. But if you're just editing it, it does not change that time and date stamp. I hope I answered that question okay.
Yes, thank you, Robin. What kind of verbiage is appropriate when addressing the change of availability due to a pregnancy or delivery? What's your verbiage advice?
I think that goes back to one of those issues where you just really need the basic information. I mean, it would be okay, to say that she was, if there's a reason why you would need to explain that a person was out of school or something for a limited amount of time due to a delivery. We've seen that. And as long as you're not going into detail about it, you're just saying, participant will not be attending school, for whatever amount of time due to having a baby. I don't know that that's necessarily infringing. I think it's just goes back to what I was trying to say of just narrowing down and not over explaining something. Don't explain the problems with pregnancy, in detail. If there's problems and the complications, just say that there's issues with pregnancy preventing her from attending school. And again, I want to reference back to your local policies and guidance from your supervisor. That's where you want to start at. And then if there's any further questions on breaching of confidentiality, then we can, they can send that question up to us and we'll just try to research it a little more. But just without having a specific scenario, I would just refer you back to your supervisor just to say, how do I write this?
Okay, thank you, Robin. Regarding the example you gave where it spoke about Stan, in quotes, the example stated, "Not further services are planned at this time." Does that mean not opening a follow-up line of service?
No, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that for Stan. I think that just meant that Stan did not follow through with what he was supposed to be doing. So just, and you don't have the big picture, Stan, because you didn't see all the case notes. I'm just giving you a certain blurb of some of what happened during that time. But there was a lot of conflict between the career planner and Stan. So I think after months and months of trying to re-engage him and he wasn't going to school, she tried to re-engage him, and it didn't happen. So after that, it was just one of those things that there was no reason to continue on. He didn't call back during the deadline. He didn't tell her if he was going to keep going to school. So it is appropriate to go ahead and end those services if you've not had any contact, or you've given him that, if he's missed month after month of contact, which is what happened with Stan. He hadn't contacted the career planner in 4 or 5 months. And then suddenly she called him in for that meeting. And by then she was mad, right? She's mad because he wasn't doing anything she asked him to do. So at that point, with 3 or 4 months of not having any activity with him and him missing the deadline to say if he was going to even go to school, I think it would be appropriate in that circumstance just to go ahead and follow through the exit. And then, if he had a job, you'd enter him in follow up. I think he was an adult. If he didn't have a job, then, you wouldn't enter him in follow up if there was no job that he had. So, those are that you're weighing those two, find out if he had a job. He may not want to talk to you anymore, which that happens. If he's mad, he may not give you any information. So it just depends on the circumstances.
Great. I'm going to do one more question here. Trade participants are not bound by the ETPL list. Are trade career planners still required to provide this list to participants and document in intake eligibility case notes?
Trade's a whole different beast. They are not bound by the approved list, and they are co-enrolled, but I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I don't know that they're bound by that list at all, because they can go outside of that approved list. So my first reaction would be no, it's not applicable, but I will double check on that with Susan and Sheila to make sure. But yeah, they can go outside of that list as long as it's approved by merit staff.
Okay.
And remember, the sample was just for a 1A customer. It wasn't for, we would do sample case notes for trade specifically. But that one that I showed you was just for a 1A, just as a sample.
Great, thank you. So we did have quite a few more questions, but I'm going to go ahead and save those, and I'll save the chat and I will send those to Robin and other people from her team. Hopefully we can put out an FAQ for anything that we weren't able to address. I just want to thank Robin for her due diligence in this presentation, as well as Andy Lasasso for putting this together with our team. I know we were able to do it in a really quick turnaround. So I just appreciate Robin and her presentation today. I think it was very valuable. And Robin, you're getting a ton of thank yous. in the
Oh, thank
chat.
you.
And everyone's telling you great job and thank you so much. This was so valuable. So we
I
really
appreciate
appreciate that positive feedback from you all. I'm going to go ahead and put the survey, and if you want to, you can give us that positive feedback in a formalized, in our formal survey we have here. I'm going to put that in the chat for everybody. It'll also be in your follow-up email tomorrow. So if you have a couple minutes, we'd appreciate that feedback. Regarding the slide deck, I know there was a lot of issues with that in the chat, and I do apologize for that. I will send that out to everybody right after this session, and then it will also be, I'll fix it on the website and put it up there. And that website link will be in the follow-up email tomorrow as well. So we'll get the recording up as well. Bear with us just because of the summit this week, but we appreciate all of you for joining the session today. It's very valuable information. And thank you again, Robin, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate all of you joining me today and taking the time out of your day, and have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.